The Fed's $1.2 trillion mistake.
Have you ever wondered if a decision meant to save us all was actually a slow-brewing catastrophe? A move that, instead of fixing a problem, secretly made things much, much worse for most of us? Today we're diving deep into the story of the wrong move, a decision made by the U.S. Federal Reserve that reshaped our economy, our society, and maybe even your future. It's 2008. The world is on the brink of financial Armageddon. Lehman Brothers has collapsed, credit markets are frozen solid, and the global economy is in a terrifying freefall. In this moment of crisis, the Federal Reserve, led by Ben Bernanke, made a choice. They had to act, and act drastically. They slashed interest rates to nearly zero, but it wasn't enough. The patient was still flatlining. So they reached for a radical, unconventional tool, quantitative easing, or QE. What is QE? Imagine the Fed has a magic checkbook with an infinite balance. They started writing massive checks, not to you or me, but to the big banks. They bought trillions of dollars worth of assets, like treasury bonds and mortgage-backed securities, directly from these financial institutions. In essence, they were creating digital money out of thin air and injecting it directly into the banking system. The goal, on the surface, seemed noble: prevent another Great Depression. The idea was that with all this new cash, banks would feel safe again. They would start lending to small businesses, to families wanting to buy a home, and get the lifeblood of the economy, credit, flowing once more. The Fed assured everyone this was a temporary emergency measure. They promised they had it all under control. But this right here was the fundamental wrong move. It was a catastrophic miscalculation disguised as a rescue plan. The theory was simple: inject liquidity at the top, and it will trickle down to everyone. But reality had other plans. The money didn't trickle down. It got stuck. The banks, fresh from a near-death experience, didn't suddenly open the lending floodgates to Main Street. Instead, they did two things. They used the money to shore up their own battered balance sheets. And more importantly, they started investing it. And where does a tidal wave of new money go when it's looking for a return? It floods into the stock market, into real estate, into anything that feels scarce and valuable. This is where the story splits into two different Americas. For the wealthy, who already owned stocks, bonds, and properties, this was the beginning of an unprecedented boom. Their net worth skyrocketed. But for everyone else, the middle class, the young, those who earned their living from a wage, it was a different story. While Wall Street was throwing a decade-long party, their wages barely budged. Worse still, the cost of everything you might want to own to build wealth, a house, a piece of the stock market, was pushed further and further out of reach. QE became a trillion-dollar wealth transfer, not by design, but by a flaw in its very DNA. The system was built to save the banks, and the rescue mission stopped right at their front door. It deepened a generational divide, creating a chasm between the asset-rich and the asset-poor. Fast forward to 2020. A new crisis hits, a global pandemic. The economy shuts down. And what does the Fed, now under Jerome Powell, do? They make the same move, but on an even more epic scale. This time, they didn't just repeat QE, they supersized it, injecting trillions of dollars in mere months. But there was a new ingredient in the mix: fiscal stimulus. The government started sending checks directly to people. So now you had the Fed's monetary fire hose aimed at Wall Street, and government checks flooding Main Street. What happens when you pour that much money into an economy that's producing fewer goods and services because of lockdowns? The answer is the inflation we are all living with today. Prices for gas, for groceries, for rent, everything started climbing. And here lies the second wrong move. The Fed initially dismissed this rising inflation as transitory, a temporary blip that would sort itself out. They waited. They delayed acting. This delay allowed inflation to become entrenched, to weave itself into the fabric of the economy, making it that much harder and more painful to control later on. It was a 1-2 punch. First, the massive, excessive injection of money, and second, the arrogant denial that it would have consequences. So, what is the true cost of this decade-long experiment? The Fed did prevent an immediate collapse. They saved the system. But in doing so, they may have doomed it to a long, chronic illness. They created what many call the everything bubble, where the price of assets from tech stocks to used cars became completely detached from their real-world value. When that bubble eventually bursts, the fallout could be immense. They also destroyed the value of savings. For anyone who diligently put money aside in a savings account, inflation has been a silent thief, eroding their purchasing power year after year. $1 saved in 2019 is worth significantly less today, and perhaps most damaging of all, they sowed deep and lasting distrust. The public watched the system bend over backwards to rescue Wall Street in 2008, only to punish Main Street with inflation a decade later. This feeling, that the game is rigged, that the financial system serves only the elite, has fueled social unrest and a desperate search for alternatives, driving interest in things like cryptocurrencies. In the end, the story of quantitative easing is a story of intellectual hubris, the belief that a small group of economists could centrally plan and fine-tune a multi-trillion-dollar economy without any unintended side effects. They tried to defy a fundamental law of economics. You cannot print wealth out of thin air. You can only print currency, and in doing so, you devalue it for everyone. QE was the powerful medicine that saved the patient from dying on the operating table, but it left them with a crippling, long-term disease of inequality, instability, and a deep-seated mistrust in the very institutions meant to protect us. It was the wrong move, and we are all living with the consequences. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. If you found this explanation helpful and want to understand more about the hidden forces shaping our world, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next video.